Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Shift, a weekly live stream series from the Story of Stuff project. I'm Shilpi Chhotray, the Global Communications Lead for Break Free from Plastic. I'm excited to be hosting a conversation today between two leaders of the Break Free from Plastic movement and old friends, Leonard and Hernandez. This is a very special episode of The Shift, not only because today is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, yay, but also because today is the global television premiere of The Story of Plastic. At 2 p.m. at your local time today in the US, The Story of Plastic will be showing on Discovery Network. Tune in if you're able to. It will also be available on Discovery channels around the world, so check your local programming guides. Hang around because we'll be streaming the trailer for Story of Plastic at the very end of this episode. And of course, for more information about how to watch and even screen The Story of Plastic in your community, go to storyofplastic.org. All right, let's get started. The Story of Plastic does what no documentary about plastics has ever done, drawing our eyes back from the part of the problem most of us see every day, all of that plastic ending up in the oceans, to view the whole problematic life cycle of the material, from the oil and gas wellheads and pipelines where plastic originates, to the poisonous chemical plants where it's manufactured, and then to the incinerators and landfills where so much of it ends up. But the story of plastic is also about hope, of grassroots heroes around the world standing up to the polluters and working together to find real solutions. And speaking of heroes, I'm honored and excited to introduce today's guests on The Shift. Hi, Annie and Vaughn. So welcome. Annie Leonard is the founder and creator of the Story of Stuff project and executive director of Greenpeace USA. She joins us from the San Francisco Bay Area. And Vaughn Hernandez is the global coordinator of Break Free from Plastic, a movement of more than 2,500 organizations working all around the world fighting to end plastic pollution for good. He is joining us from Manila, Philippines. So thank you both so much for being here on the Shift with me. Annie and Vaughn, you are no strangers to collaboration and intersectionality. Your work together and friendship literally goes back decades to when you were both toxic campaigners at Greenpeace and then helped to found Gaia, the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, which is also a core member of Break Free from Plastic. So I want to start with a little storytelling. Can each of you tell us a bit about how you came to work together?
You go first, Vaughn. I want to see if our stories match.
Well, my introduction to the environmental movement, actually, Annie played a key role. She was then a campaigner for Greenpeace, working on toxic waste trade globally. And at that time, there were numerous instances of hazardous waste being exported from the US or from Europe to many parts of Asia. And so Greenpeace came to Philippines, and Annie was the lead campaigner, and actually inducted a number of activists here in Manila about the issue, and that's how I actually got involved. I've been working with Annie, exposing and stopping many of these hazardous waste shipments coming to Asia. I consider Annie a mentor in many respects.
It is mutual. I think that, I'm trying to remember what year that was. When we took the Greenpeace ship around the Philippines, that was 93, which I only remember because I still have the t-shirt.
Early 90s, yes.
Yes, the early 90s. So I remember I worked for Greenpeace International then, and Greenpeace didn't have offices in Asia, and except for a small one in Japan. And so we were starting to think about working in Asia, and Asia was very new to me. And so I asked friends, who do you know that can teach me about Asia? And somebody told me about you, Vaughn. And I came with a couple of other Greenpeace colleagues, Dave Batker and Dewi Suralaga, and we had a meeting in the Philippines, which Vaughn came to and helped us organize. And we had about 30 or so local activists come, and we just introduced ourselves and talked about what we were interested, we wanted to hear what they were interested in. And I remember such a warm welcome from the Filipino activists, partly because they weren't used to international NGOs coming and listening and saying, what's important to you? How can we work together? And I think that the seeds of Greenpeace's very collaborative approach in Southeast Asia started from that meeting, which Vaughn helped to organize.
Right, and actually that work led eventually to the establishment of Greenpeace offices in Asia. So in Southeast Asia, in India, where you also spent a considerable amount of time, and where we also campaigned not only against export of hazardous waste from industrialized countries, but also export of dirty technology. Right. So, and this was, the focus of our campaigning work in the 90s.
Right, and it's interesting that this is the anniversary of Earth Day, because it was in the 1970s, early 1970s, that Earth Day really exploded in the United States. That first Earth Day, 20 million people participated. I mean, imagine if we could get 20 million people to participate. They weren't all in the same place, but 20 million people did something about Earth Day. And originally, when the environmental movement started in the US, it was really focused a lot on the US, less of a global mindset. And so inadvertently, what happened is a lot of our victories turned into someone else's burden. And that we would be exporting things that were banned here. So there was a strong movement against certain hazardous pesticides that became banned for use here, but they were still manufactured here and exported. Same thing with incinerators. When the anti-incinerator movement was so strong here in the 1980s, there were 400 proposed incinerators in the 80s and 90s, and communities organized and prevented 300 of them. They didn't just go away, they went to Asia. They started traveling overseas. And so it was hazardous technologies, hazardous waste, hazardous products. And in the US, a lot of people talk about environmentalists as NIMBY, which means not in my backyard. And it was someone in the Philippines who told me, you environmentalists have to change that from NIMBY to NOPE, which is not on planet Earth. That if an incinerator or plastic garbage is too dangerous for me in California and my children, then it is too dangerous in the Philippines. It is too dangerous in Bangladesh. So it's really in tracking the export of hazardous technologies and wastes that I personally developed a more international mindset. And a lot of environmentalists did as well, that we have to have global solidarity or we're not going to win this.
Right on.
That's
Thank
true.
you so much, Annie and Vaughn. Reflecting on what both of you said, I think, one thing that some activists in the plastic pollution fight today, including myself, are actually surprised by how far back this fight goes, not just over waste and incinerators, but over plastic itself. And the activists that are doing work today are literally standing on the shoulders of heroes who waged this fight decades ago. Can each of you reflect a bit on that history?
Thanks, Shilpi. Actually, as Annie said, the market has always externalized the costs, right, of human economic activity in this context. We've seen many instances of hazardous waste being shipped from rich to poor countries, taking advantage of that declining economic gradient, where occupational environmental safety controls are non-existent in the developing world, for example. So as environmental regulations became stricter in the West, as Annie pointed out, you were victorious in that part of the world, but they were ending up also in our part of the world. And that was one of the realizations why we also formed a global alliance for incinerator alternatives, Gaia, because we knew that this was a global struggle and there was a global fight. And it was not only hazardous waste or hazardous dirty technologies that are being exported, but it's actually a system, right? And that's a linear model that, from extraction all the way to consumption and disposal, that's being translocated across regions. And that's been globalized, in fact. And it's the reason why when we talk about plastics, we know that this is also a global problem that has many global implications and ramifications. And you know very well, Shilpi, that so one part of the reason why this is high on the political agenda at the moment.
Yeah. And digging into that a little bit, this question is for Annie. So here we are today engaged in many of the same fights and struggles over who is to blame for plastic pollution, for instance. And for decades, industry has told ordinary people that we were to blame for this plastic pollution, that we were the litter bugs, not the companies who made this throwaway product in the first place. So Annie, how do you think we're doing on that part of the fight, especially on the messaging front? Are we shifting the blame to the right people, the right sectors?
So I've been tracking plastic issues for about 30 years, and I think the movement on plastic is more sophisticated than ever, partly because of the global mindset and the international solidarity that is so strong. And with the internet, we can communicate with our friends around the world, but also because of our understanding of plastic has shifted. Back in the 70s, it really was like a litter problem. And that's partly because we saw it everywhere, but it's also because that was an industry technique. It was actually the packaging industry who came up with the term litter bug and really tried to focus everybody's attention on proper disposal of the plastic once it was created, in order to divert attention from all of the pollution, all of the waste, all of the health hazards upstream. And they were very effective. For a long time, people really thought that plastic was a waste problem. Now, as Vaughn said, he used the word systems. People see that plastic is a system problem. It is not just about waste, it's about health, because there's enormous toxic chemicals involved in plastic production. It's about climate, because plastics are made from fossil fuels. It's about our corporate dominated, just hyper-consumption capitalist model, which rewards companies for making more stuff. And this hyper-consumption, it's the whole system. So I remember when I first started working on waste, we would sort of assume that the waste existed, and the question was, what should we do with this waste? And if you start there, it's too late. You've already ruled out the right answers. There's no answer except burn it, bury it, or dump it on somebody else's yard. Like that's all you can do once it's there. So the question is not what should we do with this waste, but how do we redesign our economy? How do we redefine our cultural norms? How do we redefine what true security and convenience means to design that waste out of the system? So it's an economic problem, it's a mindset problem. Mostly it's a corporate problem, because corporations are driving this problem and blocking any solutions.
And, Annie and Vaughn, you're both veterans of corporate campaigns. Do you think companies are getting the message?
They have to. I mean, for a long time, they brainwashed or mesmerized the public, thinking that this is all about individual responsibility, and a lot of people really fell for that. Even I know environmentalists, friends of ours, and you talk about Earth Day, and a lot of the celebrations and commemorative events around Earth Day focus on recycling. So we fell for it, but now we see that the real stories are coming out. So instead of blaming individuals, we now know what's driving this problem globally. It's the corporations making those decisions behind closed doors to flood our markets with single-use throwaway or disposable packaging. And it's the same problem that is leading to species extinction, it's leading to ecological devastation, it's leading to tremendous health impacts, and as Annie mentioned, climate. It accelerates climate change. So clearly, they are feeling the pressure, and you would know that from the pronouncements made by some of these big corporations who are peddling single-use throwaway plastic packaging. They're committing to recycle more. They're committing to invest in better collection. Unfortunately, they're still failing to internalize the real solutions that are required here, which is to shift to alternative systems of delivery that do not require disposability or throwaway plastic.
Yeah, I think they're saying good messages, some good messages. But I like to joke that they're so into recycling, they're even recycling the same narratives they tried in the 1970s and 1980s. If you look at this bogus new corporate alliance to end plastic waste, It is like complete deja vu from the 1970s and 80s when they tried to put all the attention on plastic waste. Even the Alliance to End Plastic Waste should cut out waste. It should be the Alliance to
Right.
End Plastic. And if you look at this corporate fiasco that they're putting together, it's all about proper management, proper end-of-life disposal. It's all about assuming that the same amount of plastic is going to keep coming, and then we have to handle it well. And technically and economically, there is no way to handle the amount of plastic that is coming through the system. And even if you could recycle 100% of it, that doesn't take care of all of the upstream problems. You know, the production, all of the toxic chemicals. I was actually talking with somebody who works for one of these big consumer goods companies. It was an off-the-record conversation, so I can't tell you who. But I asked this person, what alternatives is this gigantic multinational that you work for, what alternatives are you aware of to petroleum-based, toxic-laden, single-use plastic? And they had so many alternatives. Like there's plastic that turns into fish food when it gets wet. There's literally an infinite number of alternatives that they could use, from different materials to different delivery systems. And so I said, why aren't you doing them? If you know about all of these, why aren't you doing them? And this person told me because virgin plastic, which is fossil fuels, is so cheap, it doesn't make sense in this economic system. So even if we convince the people who run these companies to care about the planet, it doesn't make economic sense. So I asked this person, what can groups like Greenpeace or Break Free from Plastics or Gaia, what can civil society groups do to change the context? And you know what they said? They said, fight fossil fuel development, keep it in the ground. If we want to slow down the flow of single-use plastic, we've got to slow down fossil fuels. And if we want to slow down fossil fuels, we've got to slow down single-use plastic. And so just as the plastics and health movement have merged so much over the last couple of decades, now it's time for the plastics and climate movement to become one, because the root of both of those is fossil fuels.
That's a really good point, Annie. And I think, so much of what makes Break Free from Plastic incredibly powerful is the intersectionality of it. And so this question is for you, Vaughn. When you look at the rapid growth of the movement, you must be really pleased. I mean, I know I am. What do you think accounts for the enthusiasm and growing impact of the movement, of which, Greenpeace is a core member?
The growth of the movement has been quite phenomenal. We're now 3 years old, a little bit over 3 years old, but and we have thousands of members and organizations that have come on board. And I think that's also because of the increasing awareness about the issue, the awareness that this is not just a littering issue or a waste management issue, but really a systemic issue. The approach that Break Free from Plastic has adopted, which is to look at the plastic supply chain in a holistic way, has managed to bring all the dots together. So you have communities working the front lines, resisting expansion of petrochemical facilities, working with activists at the other side of the spectrum, working on pollution, working on impacts of dirty waste management like incineration and disposal, landfilling. So bringing all these actors together, I think, has made those interdependencies across the world, across different sectors, across different organizations, much clearer. And I think that accounts for also one of the reasons why the movement has been successful so far. Secondly, also governments are waking up to the issue. When China decided to ban the import of plastic waste in 2017, that has created, as you know, an uproar, or let's say it upended the global markets on plastics trade. And it has exposed many of the fallacies and many of the myths that have been propagated for a long time by industry. For example, that recycling is going to take care of this problem for us, when we know that the track record clearly shows that they have failed to do so in the last 50 years or so, right? Why should we believe them now? And Annie mentioned the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. They're putting $1.5 billion for this problem. But that's a pittance compared to what it would actually take, to resolve or clean this problem globally. 150 billion, in fact, according to recent estimates, and it's a pittance compared to their expansion plans. And it's unfortunate that many. Right now, when we're in the middle of a crisis, the industry is also trying to exploit that to their advantage, to try to argue for or more justification for single-use plastics or increasing plastics production in general.
Thank you, Vaughn. Annie, this question is for you. So you recently appeared in Frontline Special Plastic Wars, which was really fantastically done. And you were asked about the progress made over the last several decades. And you called what's happening today a real battle, saying this is our most important chance to fundamentally reduce plastics production as a bigger part of the war against fossil fuels. We touched on this quite a bit, systems change, connecting to climate. What would you tell viewers that are tuned in today on how they can better connect the dots between plastics and fossil fuels at the dinner table and in their everyday conversations in a really simple way?
Well, they should ask all of their friends and family members and fellow churchgoers and co-workers and classmates to watch The Story of Plastic, because that is a fantastic film, and to watch that and then have a discussion afterwards. And so really hats off to the Story of Stuff Project and to Break Free from Plastic for making this incredibly useful tool. It does in about, is it 90 minutes-ish? About 90 minutes, when it took me 10 years of traveling all around the world to learn. So it's a huge service to the movement. I think one thing is drawing the attention to the fact that plastic is fossil fuels. When you're holding a plastic bottle, it doesn't come naturally that this was made out of fracked gas or fossil fuels. There's a sort of cognitive dissonance. So even just making sure that people understand that plastic is 95% or more fossil fuels, so they know that, is a big thing. Another thing is talking about it in the frame of democracy. Plastic is not just a litter issue. It is not just a health issue. It is not just a climate issue. It's also a democracy issue. And that's why I'm saying this is really a battle right now, is that what the plastic industry is doing, and the packaging industry that uses it, they are doubling down on their plans to massively expand plastic. Absolutely. They are lying to the public, as they have for decades, about that recycling will solve it. And those are very, very bad things. But they're doing something even more insidious right now, is they're trying to undermine our democratic right to do something about it. So around the United States, plastic companies are getting laws passed in different states that outlaw citizens organizing, using our democratic rights to protect our health and environment, to ban particularly problematic plastic. And we cannot let them take away our rights to engage in a democracy, because that's the best tool we have to fight plastics.
Thank you, Annie. That's a really, really good point. I think, going back to what you said about the story of plastic, it is so important in understanding that it's not just a litter problem, and it's so much of a part of a larger system connected to all of these other things, even at the political level. And as we close, we're running out of time here. I would love if you could both share what you think makes Story of Plastic so special in terms of what surprised or even stuck with you when you watched the film, and even for you, Vaughn, being a key subject in the film.
Yeah, well, as the film is rich in its demonstration of the extent of the crisis, plastic pollution crisis globally, and how it really demonstrates the interconnections across countries, across geographies, and across the supply chain. And many people who have been following this issue probably have heard that the key sources of the problem of plastic pollution in the oceans are the Asian countries, right? So the top 10 countries are mostly Asia. But you would see that also, you would recognize that there is some grain of truth to that, but at the same time you have to go deeper. And the film would enable you to understand the other driving forces, why that is actually taking place, right? Who are the real drivers of the problem? Companies, fossil fuel, the links with fossil fuel companies, and then realizing that the story of plastic is also about the story of fossil fuels, or the story of climate change. So it is not true, as some commentators have expressed, that the focus on plastic pollution is crowding out much needed action on climate change, when in fact they are flip sides of the same coin. Both are spawned by our dependence on fossil fuels.
Absolutely, and both are allowed because of our corporate control of our democracy, which is why we've got to reduce the political influence of these companies. I think the story of plastics is so amazing for making visible what's often invisible, for pulling the veil away from the sort of out of sight, out of mind, that you really see plastic's entire life cycle. So often with plastic, especially if you live in a privileged community, your only relationship with plastic is from the store to your house to your recycling bin, and that's it. And you don't actually get to see what happens before the store or after the recycling bin. And so to be able to bring that into people's homes, onto their screens, so that we can all see that, is incredibly important. Another thing I think is really important about the film is showing the intentionality of it. It is not inevitable that we are drowning in plastic waste. It didn't just happen. It wasn't a coincidence. It certainly was not because consumers demanded it. It was because it served big corporations and they pushed that. And we must not let them think that it's our fault that we demanded it. And then, of course, the best thing about the film is the incredibly inspiring activists all around the world, that the scale of the problem can feel insurmountable and overwhelming. And then you see these activists, including my friend Vaughn, from all over, that are doing the most incredible political organizing, power building, corporate campaigns. And I left feeling like this is a huge problem and we're going to beat it.
Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have for today's episode. Thanks, Annie and Vaughn, so much. I really appreciate you joining us today. And thanks to the Story of Stuff Project for inviting me to host this special break-free takeover of The Shift. We encourage all of you to tune in this afternoon at 2 p.m. your local time on the Discovery Channel for the premiere of Story of Plastic. And please visit storyofplastic.org for more information on how you can watch the movie wherever you are in the world. And do sign up to host a viewing party for your friends, your family, your peers, your student groups, your church groups, and your colleagues. And now, without further ado, here's the trailer for The Story of Plastic. Take care, everyone, and thanks for watching The Shift.
We're back with an alarming new report that came out this past week on the state of the world's oceans.
32% of plastic packaging ends up littering the environment. 40% is sitting in a landfill somewhere. 14% is incinerated. 14% is recycled. But only 2% is effectively recycled.
Downhill from the prison, downhill from the mall, downhill from the factory farm and the hospital.
It's not reasonable at all that we continue to live like this.
Downhill from the border wall, downhill from everywhere, downhill from all you see. The ocean is downhill from gravity.
About 8 million metric tons go into the ocean every year. That's the equivalent of one city garbage truck dumping a load of plastic into the ocean every minute of every day.
This is the story of plastics. It is fossil fuels finding a new form and finding a new place to flow through the economy.
The surge of attention to plastic pollution is pretty striking.
Think of the ocean as yours. Do you think about it at all?
I believe we're at a tipping point right now. I've seen more policy change globally in the last 8 months than I've seen in 20 years of my career. Because not only are governments getting pissed off, but companies are recognizing they can't get away with it anymore.
I don't think they can keep on tricking people forever.